Hi everyone, my name is Matt and welcome to my channel. I've had Nurgle on my mind recently, and I thought about changing around the color scheme on this Chaos Warrior. I think a really pale colored armor might be a unique way to set an army apart from the rest. We also have a set of recipe cards to go along with this video, and you can download them and print them out. Details about how to get them will be down in the description below. The first half of the video will be beginner friendly, and we'll cover the basics and paint the model to a battle ready quality. In the second half, we'll spend a little more time and add some highlights. So let's grab our brushes and get started. After assembling the model, I undercoated it with a bright white primer, and then mounted the parts to corks for easier handling. I began with a layer of Mortarian grime all over the armor. Even though this is labeled as a shade paint, it works really well as a light base coat. The important thing here is to make sure you have a bright white primer. If your primer is too dark, the color won't show up as well. If you want a really pale looking armor, I wouldn't recommend using anything other than a bright white primer. Next, I painted some of the cloth with Militarum green. Even though the pale armor has a greenish tone, I don't think it's quite green enough. Green is what really defines Nurgle to me, so I want to include a brighter green on the model. After the first layer dried, I painted a second layer right on top of it. I mixed about 4 parts contrast medium and 1 part Sigor brown, and painted it on all the leather areas. I want to have a couple different shades of leather on the model, and this mix will work nicely as a base coat for both areas. Next, I painted a layer of Black Templar on some of the leather. I decided to paint the straps, belt, and boots. If it looks too dark to you, you can add a very small amount of contrast medium or water to make it more transparent. I painted Gore-Grunta fur on the scabbards next. If you want to simplify your color scheme, you could eliminate this color and just go with one of the other leather colors instead. After the first layer dried, I painted a second for a deep, rich color. I want to offset the pale armor with something really dark, so I made a mix of equal parts Sigvald Burgundy and Black Templar, and I painted it on the cape and weapon handles. Large surfaces like the cape can be tricky to get smooth, so you may want to paint a second layer for an even finish. I painted the horns next with Skeleton Horde. I'd like the horns to get darker at the top, and I painted a blended effect with Basilicanum Gray. Contrast paint is really easy to blend. You may find it easier to wet the surface slightly first, then paint a small section, rinse the brush, wipe it on a paper towel, and then use the clean brush to blend to the edge. I think the cape could be a little darker, so while I had the Basilicanum Gray on my palette, I painted a layer over the top of the cape. Before I move on to the next areas, I added a narrow black outline wherever I wanted some extra definition. I think it's especially necessary around the armor trim. I base coated the armor trim next with Balthasar gold. Normally I use Runelord brass, but I wanted something a little darker to offset the light armor color. I base coated the chainmail and axe blade next with Iron Hand steel, and after the first layer dried, I painted a second for a bright, even finish. I think the model could use more of a green tone, so I shaded just about everything with a mix of equal parts Athonian camo shade and contrast medium. I painted a generous amount on the metals, armor, horns, and leather. I tried to pay special attention to the armor plates, and make sure there wasn't too much wash accumulating on them. Now is a great time for me to ask you to do those YouTube things that we all love so much. If you're liking the video so far, please give it a like. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any future content. If you really like what I'm doing here and want to support the channel further, please consider Patreon or a YouTube channel membership. We have some perks including a Discord server, printer-friendly PDF files of our new recipe cards, and early access to videos. Then I shaded the metals with a layer of Nuln Oil. Depending on how dark you'd like your metal to be, you may want to paint a second layer. Next I added some quick oxidation to the metals. I think regular paint diluted with water makes great looking rust. I diluted some Mournfang brown with plenty of water, and with barely any paint on the brush, I built up a few layers on the armor, the axe, and the chainmail. There should be barely any paint on the brush, and it should dry almost as soon as it touches the model. Look for any chips or scratches where rust might gather, and around the rivets too. I also added some rust dripping down here and there. I like adding oxidation to brass and bronze areas too. I like really colorful Nurgle models, and the turquoise adds some extra variety. I used the same process as the brown rust, using Ahriman blue paint diluted with water. At this stage you could assemble the model and call it finished, but I'd like to add a few quick highlights, so let's keep going. If you made any mistakes and need to touch up the armor, Krieg Khaki is a near perfect color match. Next I added a few edge highlights with Offwhite. You could add a few chips and scratches here as well if you want to. I highlighted the green fabric next with Orruk flesh, with a very small amount of Offwhite mixed in. Depending on how light your base coat dried, you may need to adjust the highlight color slightly. Moving on to the lighter shade of leather next, I painted some glaze highlights with Steel Legion Drab. Dilute the paint with plenty of water, and with barely any paint on your brush, add some scratches and random shapes on the raised edges and folds. The contrast base coats have some uneven surfaces, and I like to look for any interesting shapes as a starting point for adding texture. If I like the way an area looks, I can emphasize it with some highlights next to it, or if I don't like that spot, I can just cover it up. I highlighted the leather one more time with diluted Zandri dust. I mostly reinforced the scratches I made earlier, and picked out some of the sharper edges. I also painted the stitches with Zandri dust, leaving a dark outline. Then I added a few narrow lines of Bonewhite on each stitch, so they look like twisted strings. I highlighted the dark leather next with thin glazes of diluted Steel Legion Drab. This is a similar process to the other leather, but because it's so much darker, I want to make sure the glaze is diluted with more water. Remember to have barely any paint on the brush, that way it doesn't run or flow anywhere. The layers here are very transparent, and the dark base coat is showing through a bit. Build up some textures and scratches with each layer, focusing each one closer towards the edges and the more prominent scratches. Then I highlighted the edges of the scabbards with Ratskin flesh. I'd like to add some rich purple to the cape, but not so much that it detracts from the green. I used a similar kind of glaze highlight process with Phoenician purple diluted with water. With barely any paint on the brush, I built up some transparent scratches on the top half of the cape. I'm going to add some dirt to the bottom of the cape, so I'll avoid painting that half right now. The key here is to build up layers, one on top of the other. Finally, I grabbed some less diluted paint and added more opaque lines on the edges and a few prominent scratches. Next, I highlighted a few scratches and edges with Daemonette hide. This is a very gray-leaning purple, and I think more muted highlights are better in the context of this color scheme. If you want a more vibrant purple, you could highlight with Genestealer purple instead. I highlighted the weapon handles next with Screamer Pink, followed by an equal parts mix of Screamer Pink and Zandri dust. If you don't feel like mixing anything, you could use Bugman's Glow instead. I highlighted the edges of the horns next with a very sharp line of Bonewhite, diluted with an equal amount of water. Next, I highlighted the brass with Canoptek alloy. I painted most of the edges, and I added a few scratches here and there too. I highlighted the steel next with Stormhost silver, again painting most of the edges and a few scratches. Finally, I added some dirt to the bottom of the cape with a stippled glaze of Steel Legion Drab. I diluted the paint with plenty of water, and used an old brush to stipple the paint. The older the brush, the better the effect will be. After that dried, I added a few scratches with a sharp brush. The base comes with texture on it, so I'd like to do something a little different from my usual sand and grass. I think I'll try going for a contrast style base, and I painted a layer of Mortarian grime all over to start. Then I painted the stones with Basilicanum gray, followed by wildwood on the dirt. Then I painted the chain with Ironhand steel. Next I covered the base in a mix of equal parts Athonian camo shade and contrast medium. And then I painted the edge of the base black. After the base dried, I assembled the model with super glue. I'd like to give a big shout out to our supporters here on YouTube and Patreon. Thank you so much for your support. It really is a huge help. If you want to be like these amazing people and help support what I'm doing here, just click the join button down below or follow the Patreon link in the video description. Thank you. This was a refreshing take on Nurgle, and I really enjoyed painting the model, especially the pale armor. I think it would look really good on some Horus Heresy Death Guard. The purple was also fun and different, something you don't normally see on Nurgle. What do you think? Does the color scheme work for you, or do you prefer the traditional green look? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching, and until next time, happy painting!